No man walked on the moon. A common gardener's leaf blower proves that we never went to the moon. A PowerPoint presentation produced on January the 22nd, 2020. Permission is hereby granted to make copies. This is Ralph Epperson, and I have long believed that America never went to the moon. But until I watched my neighbor's gardener use his leaf blower, I never had the definitive proof that I was right. This is a picture of someone using a leaf blower to move leaves from one spot to another. Notice that it kicks up quite a cloud of leaves, at least 6 feet high in this case. But notice one more thing. The gardener does not have to stand in the leaves to get them to move. He can stand as much as 8 to 10 feet away. This, of course, is the Earth with one gravity. And this is the moon, once again, with 1/6 of the gravity of the Earth. This is a picture of the lunar lander on the moon. Notice that it consists of 2 parts. The first one being the 4 struts joined at the bottom of each by a coffee saucer-shaped pad, which is to keep it from sinking into the moon's surface. This is a picture of one of these 4 pads on the end of a strut. The second part is the lunar lander, which consists of the compartment for the astronauts themselves and all of their necessary technical guidance equipment. Notice that the lunar lander itself never sat on the moon. It sat above the 4 struts and their respective pads. The reason the lunar lander is about 10 feet above the ground is because the lunar lander has a rocket engine called the descent engine, and it has 10,000 pounds of thrust. It is intended to slow the speed of the lunar lander as it descends to the mooning. It must burn all the way down to make certain the entire lander settles safely on the surface. This is an Apollo 11 moon landing wallpaper mural that is available through Amazon.com. Notice that the 10,000-pound thrust engine is depicted as burning with a yellow flame, and the lander has not set down yet. I must presume that a flame this size could really blow dust away as it got close to the surface, especially on the moon with 1/6 the gravity of the Earth. So now let's go back to the landing of the lunar lander on the moon on July the 20th, 1969. CBS News covered the Apollo 11 lunar lander live as it descended onto the surface. They called the program Apollo 11, The Complete Descent. Their technicians had created a simulation of the Apollo 11 lander as it slowly was brought down to the surface of the moon. The 2 hosts of the program were Walter Cronkite of CBS News and Wally Schirra, a NASA astronaut. This slide was taken during the program, and it showed the number of minutes and seconds before it was scheduled to land. And it continued to provide the details about the lander and its descent. Please notice the size of the flame being shown as it burned under the lunar lander. This slide shows the simulation, and the object to the right of the green arrow is their rendition of the lander itself. This slide shows that it is 20 seconds away from the landing. This slide appears to show the rocket engine actually burning the surface of the moon just prior to the landing of the lunar lander. It can be presumed that this is when the rocket engine could kick up a cloud of dust and start the creation of a crater. And the viewer heard these words from NASA as it landed, quote, "kicked up dust," end quote. I want to repeat that. Someone at NASA on the Earth, or one of the astronauts, said that the lunar lander had, quote, "kicked up dust," end quote. And then NASA said, quote, engine stopped, end quote. And then Mr. Cronkite said, quote, man on the moon, end quote. So someone at NASA saw the lunar lander had, quote, kicked up dust, end quote, just before it landed, and then the engine stopped. Please notice that the engine was firing until it had landed, and then it was stopped. That means that the flame was not turned off until the lunar lander had settled on the surface of the moon. That means it had plenty of opportunity to kick up dust and create a crater. I will shortly examine photographs of the lander on the moon to see if it indeed had, quote, kicked up dust, end quote. And then, after the lunar lander had landed, the program showed that Mr. Cronkite was extremely pleased that the landing was a success. One can easily say that Mr. Cronkite was deeply pleased that he and the astronaut had pulled it off. They had convinced the world that we landed on the moon. Because the truth is that the lunar lander did not land on the moon, as I shall now prove. But Mr. Cronkite said that it did. I would like to take a few moments and talk about the fuel for this descent engine. I did a little research and found out that the fuel that this engine burns is the combination of methane and oxygen. And it burns at 3,000 degrees. That is called hot. And I speculate that this would be hot enough to melt the dust on the surface of the moon. And the dust would not only be kicked up, it would be burned to black. And if it did, we would be able to see it under the lunar lander. Now let's take a look at various photographs taken of the lunar lander on the surface of the moon and see if we can see a blackened area underneath the lander. The dust kicked up and any evidence of a crater. But first, I must say that some of these photographs could be of other Apollo missions. These photographs were not identified by NASA. Therefore, we will look for any evidence of three things: signs of black dust, dust kicked up, and sign of a crater. This is photograph number 1, and there are no signs of black dust, dust kicked up, or craters. This is photograph number 2, and there are no signs of black dust and crater. This is photograph number 3, and there are no signs of the three conditions. This is photograph number 4, and once again, there is no evidence of the three conditions. Photograph number 5 also shows no signs of the three conditions. Photograph number 6 shows a lack of the three conditions. Photograph number 7 also shows no evidence of the three conditions. Photograph number 8 shows no evidence of the three conditions. And photograph 9, the last one we will examine, also shows no evidence of the three conditions. This is the picture of the pad once again, and you should see it covered in moon dust blown there by the 10,000-pound leaf blower as it landed, and some evidence of blackened dust. But there is not even a slight evidence of moon dust, black or otherwise. We have looked at 9 pictures of the lunar lander to see if we found any that showed that dust can be kicked up, that dust can be blackened, and that there were craters created as the lunar lander actually set down on the moon. Now, are there any pictures showing that the dust on the moon can be stirred up into a dust cloud? And the answer is yes, there are. This is a picture of the lunar rover, a small car-like vehicle that can transport the astronauts from one place to another on the moon. And here in picture number 1 of 4, it shows that the back wheels and the front wheels of the lunar rover can kick up a dust cloud. And the second picture shows the dust being blown into a dust cloud as well. Picture number 3 shows the rover kicking up dust in the front as in the rear as well. This picture shows it kicking up dust both in the front and in the rear. So the moon dust can be kicked up. It just isn't done under the lunar lander with the 10,000-pound leaf blower. So if the lunar lander did not land on the moon, where did it land? This is how it could have landed on a movie set in a large warehouse with the dusty gray floor. It could have landed on such a surface by a crane. Now, of course, this was not a picture of a crane setting it down on a movie set of grayish dust. It showed it being picked up so that it could be placed. It could be placed somewhere else. So, in conclusion, the common leaf blower proves that no man walked on the moon. They lied.